Hi everybody and welcome to another Kalicube Tuesdays. Today with Kaspar Szymanski, is that correct?
Szymanski, almost there.
I'll sing it then. A quick hello and we're good to go. Welcome to the show, Kaspar Szymanski.
Very good.
Hello, and I got my shush mixed up.
Hello, Jason. It's a privilege. Thank you for having me on the show again.
Absolutely delightful. I've had you once before or twice before. I think twice.
We had the opportunity to speak on the show once previously, but we met at conferences times and again.
That was it.
Yep.
I met you at a conference and I really wanted to interview you when I was doing the conference circuit, interviewing people, but you were rushing off back home to see your kids because you love your family, your kids so much that you leave immediately after your talk at conferences. Is that correct?
That's about right. I really enjoy conferences, the one-to-one interaction, one-on-many interaction on stage. It's great, but once I'm done and the Q&A is over, I pretty much rush home to get back to my boys.
Which is brilliant. But today we're not talking about your family life, we're talking about how to grow organic rankings with brand. And this is for the podcast, Branded Search and Beyond with Jason Barnard, which is the new title for the podcast where we're focusing much more on brand. So Kaspar, today you're going to be talking about organic SEO rankings with brand. But before that, I wanted to look at your brand SERP. Now, what I've done here is I've found your KGM ID. So Google has a reference to you in its knowledge graph. It has an identifier for you. And as we can see here on the left, that's the search result with the identifier. And on the right, we have the result for your name searched normally. And as you can see, they are identical. And that means Google's truly got a great grip on who you are, a semi-factual understanding whereby it can reproduce the same SERP for your name as it does for your KGM ID. How does that feel?
Well, it feels a little bit like a vindication, but as much as I'm glad to see Google returning accurate results, relevant results for my name, it really isn't only about me, it is also the brand that stands there. And I also like to think Google should really know who I am, given that I used to work for them for such a long period of time, don't you think?
Yeah, I'm sure Google would say, but we don't cheat like that by adding things for our friends. But what I do see, talking of friends, is your friend, Philly Weiss.
It's
Search Brothers.
My friend and my business partner, indeed.
Right. Well, what I found super interesting is I immediately searched for your brand name, which is Search Brothers, which is quite ambiguous. And yet Google associates Philly with Search Brothers so closely that when you search for the brand name Search Brothers, you see Philly over there on the right-hand side, alongside Barry Schwartz, Neil Patel, Rand Fishkin, and Danny Sullivan. So I would imagine you're not very far from having a knowledge panel. And I do wonder if at some point in the future, when we Google Search Brothers, whether it will show both Philly and Kaspar. Do you think that will happen?
It may, but I'm perfectly happy with Philly to be there. Philly is an equal partner, and I want to say the technical mastermind, hands down the best SEO out there. You had the privilege to work with Philly for a long period of time. We started working together back at Google in 2006. I've never met anyone in an industry full of really intelligent, of really passionate people, of people with incredible ideas. I've never met anyone more capable than Philly. So if our brand is associated with Philly, I'm more than happy to see that happen and to for that to remain as it is. I'm perfectly happy with that.
Right, that's brilliant as well, because I interviewed Philly at YostCon in 2019, I think it was, and it turns out he's a librarian by trade or by training. And I find that incredibly interesting because being a librarian must be hugely helpful to him in search.
I suppose it gave him a start that it was a jumping board, if you want. But what really truly is a developer. I always think of Philly in terms of like maybe for Matrix fans, Neo, or Morpheus, seeing the zeros and the ones really. that he's the kind of guy who has a really profound understanding of code and of technology. So yes, he's a librarian by education, but certainly he is a superb developer by trade and years of experience.
And a lovely guy as well. And now we're going to be talking about brand and using brand to grow organic rankings. A lot of people in the past have said, well, to get organic rankings, I need to count words and I need links. And brand was completely put to one side. First question for me is, to what extent do you think people are taking brand seriously in the SEO industry?
Well, I suppose some do. However, in my experience, it is frequently an approach that is not necessarily productive. Some people at times in conversation at conferences or otherwise seem to imply or assume that brand is an advantage in itself. Say, I happen to be associated with a large famous brand, and that's the reason for ranking. And that's not the case. It's not a direct factor. However, brand can be hugely conducive and really beneficial, something that can be capitalized on in organic search if utilized as it can be, as it should be, in terms of brand recognition. And that ties into the user experience, and that ties very well into the unique selling proposition, which is the starting point really for a lot of things in terms of search. So when we happen to have a product or service, whatever it is, the first and the most important thing with a long-term strategy is to understand what is our unique selling proposition. It doesn't have to be just one. It can be a multitude of things. It can be the price. It can be a particular service around it, or just the cozy feeling that people have whenever they seem to be interacting with us. So that's great. But then we obviously need the brand. And the reason for building the brand is so that people recognize our landing pages when they compete against the competitors in SERPs for relevant queries. Why? That's because if people recognize a pattern, a landing page that is ranking, they tend to click on it. Now, if we live up to that expectation, if our landing page delivers on what we're promising to, what lies behind it, then the user imply with their behavior that they were satisfied. And for Google users, that means this was a query that was well served. Whenever that, yep. Please.
Sorry, there are two things there. I think we need to wind back a little bit. Number one
Absolutely.
is going to be, to what extent does my recognition of a brand name affect my click behavior as a user? And the second is, to what extent is query satisfaction going to affect Google? So two questions.
So how does query satisfaction impact the ranking? The short answer is tremendously. If you think about it, frequently it is said in our industry that popular websites that are popular with users are popular with Google, and that's actually true. And the reason is very simple. Google doesn't care so much for us as an industry. They don't care for what website ranks. They care for the user experience. They want to make sure that their users are satisfied. So they measure user satisfaction. Now, if a user goes and they type in a query, they are confronted with 10 results, and you can choose one. Two or three things can happen, but most of the time they would either go ahead and find what they were looking for, or they would not, in which case they would return back to the query, they would refine it, or look for another result, implying with their behavior, no, I haven't found what I was looking for. This was not a satisfactory experience for my particular, whatever it is I was looking for. And this is hugely important, because living up to user expectation is something that Google does measure based on user experience, and that is something that pushes up websites that do frequently live up. So this is something we most definitely want to do. Now, of course, getting to that click also requires for the user to actually believe that a particular ranking landing page represented with the snippet, title, and description, it's actually the thing I've been looking for. So we do need to have accurate titles and descriptions, and compelling ones with a unique selling proposition, with something that actually tells the user, come over here, we have the thing you've been looking for. And
So, sorry, does that mean that the brand name is less important than the USP that we're suggesting in our titles and descriptions, or
they go hand in hand?
right?
Because I will make an example based on my user behavior. As a user, I'm very keen on books. I buy a lot of books, and typically they're not easily to be found because they're all prints and stuff like that. So I would go ahead and type in the author and the title. Now, when presented with the results, there would be, of course, Goodreads, and there will be a couple of other known platforms, but there may be also one or two landing pages of brands that I know that are not the largest brand out there, but brands that I know. If I already know them, I'm more likely to click on them because my past experience might imply, yes, I've purchased a book with them before and it was fine. And this is just one example, and this is just the books that I'm looking for, of course. This ties into everyday behaviors. Every query that people do, they are most likely to trust the brand or the platform they are already familiar with. It makes that decision so much easier. So if we want to get that click, that first initial buy-in, we want to make sure we are a brand. We are the go-to place, preferably the one or one of the handful, but not just a generic term that is not really associated with any kind of expertise or any kind of excellence. And getting there can be stimulated. Of course, to begin with, we need to have a compelling, if we build completely from scratch, we need to come up with a compelling name, we need to come up with a compelling, not too generic logo, all these things that the marketing team would jump on and create something really great. But it goes a little bit further. Social media is a very good example, right? Because social media is a great way to communicate. Now, we have a great new product, or we happen to have a new release, all these things that we care for because it's our product, but it also opens up the opportunity to engage in a two-way communication. Now, just today, I was looking, for instance, into confirming something with regard to a flight. So I would go to Facebook and ping the airline and ask them, on chat, right then and there, guys, can you confirm, is this the kind of document I do require for my flight tomorrow? And this is a very good use case, right? If I happen to be building a brand, or I already am a brand, I need these channels when users can, in an easy way, engage in a two-way communication, either to suggest something or to ask something, or just to complain. Most of the time it is complaint, but complaints are a great source to improve the service or the product. Yet another instance where brand building is really critical. It does not translate to instant reward, but in the long term, it does pay off handsomely.
Right, and that was actually partially what my question was going to be, is there is no direct win there. Like, let's come back to organic rankings. Why would I invest in that, number one? And number two is, how would I convince my boss to invest in that?
Yes, now you're asking me to give you all the munition that you require for this in-house battle. That is the largest challenge. It isn't easy, right? Because the KPI are so difficult to measure, almost impossible, I'm inclined to say. Unfortunately, I do believe it was Ogilvy, to borrow a quote here, who said something along the lines of, I am absolutely confident that half of my budget is wasted. I just don't know which half it is. Right. It is, in simple terms, it is very difficult to draw a direct correlation between an investment in brand building and the return of investment. You can't correlate that. This is a never-ending challenge that the marketing departments all around the globe and all companies face. And it is unfortunately something that is difficult. Of course, when we talk about that conversation that you would be having with your C-level managers or with the investors, it is something where comparisons can be drawn. So we can say, right, well, we are not doing it yet, but here's our direct competitor. Let's see how they fare. Let's see, are they doing something where the user might feel compelled that this is a better experience? And using that comparison, we might get a trajectory, change the trajectory of the conversation towards an investment in a future revenue-oriented brand building effort. But if the conversation comes down to show us where it pays off, we want to see the direct correlation. This is not affiliate marketing, I'm afraid. It won't be possible.
Right. Okay. Because I mean, I had the impression we work with brand SERPs, the search result for your brand name, and we struggle hugely to prove the value. Other than you get more clicks at the bottom of the funnel coming through, more branded searches means more people see it. But as you say, the KPI is very difficult. But that what I call competitor envy, the competitor's doing it, therefore you should be. But that necessarily requires that the competitor's doing something great. But in the branding space, a lot of our competitors, a lot of brands don't do very much.
I agree. That completely is in line with my experience. Whenever we had that conversation, and this is a conversation that comes up quite a lot, we propose to start a pilot project. So let's start this effort at a very small level. And it is often to take a different and alternative approach in order to prove to have the proof of concept, if you want. We would then take a look at Google Search Console and look into queries, branded or not, or otherwise. It's preferably branded, of course. But what we want to do is to look at the queries that do receive a lot of visibility. So impressions would go through the roof with a very low CTR, because that basically says we already have all that huge traffic. We just need to tap into it. In order to get there, of course, we have to improve the snippet representation. We have to improve what we tell the user this landing page is about. Now, doing that on a large scale, of course, is an effort. Doing this on a very limited scale can be a great pilot project, preferably with a couple of cash cows where cash cow landing pages, where there is a quite potential revenue on the other side of the story. So when that is being conducted, it is not all too difficult to drive up the CTR, because very frequently it is at its lowest. So the proof of concept is there. At that point, the conversation changes.
And the increased click-through rate, assuming we're already ranking, let's say, bottom of page 1, is going to be driven primarily by your brand name and your USP.
Primarily, indeed. So very frequently what we experience, especially with large websites, you would have those landing pages for any kind of product, say fashion products, retail products, really, with millions, dozens of millions of impressions, and the CTR somewhere around the range of 0.1%. You can't break all too much by adapting these. Now, if the product allows it, you can at the same time tap into the experience that the paid search team has and ask them, listen, guys, what kind of snippets do work best for paid search? Maybe we can tap into that. There is, of course, AI, which is also an alternative to tap into it. But most of the time, within larger organizations, the expertise is already there. It's just merely within another team. So we can strengthen cross-team collaboration, get these guys, allow these guys to have their input, and have a use case that demonstrates, yes, there is huge potential there. It can be, however, magnified. It's just really just scratching on top of of the surface. Typically, wherever there is such potential, there is much more beneath. It just needs to be expanded on a larger scale. When at the same time, the brand is being massively marketed, and it really becomes the go-to place. We're obviously in a Goldilocks situation, and in an ideal situation where we really can tap into the full potential of the brand and the product at the same time. And depending, of course, on the type of product we have, type of platform we have, type of performance we have, because that is a factor we really didn't talk about. But when we make our website faster, really independently of the brand and everything else, we generally tend to have more happy clients or more happy users. When we optimize all of these factors roughly at the same time, you really can, we'll really then aim for the term sky is the limit, really, for skyrocketing SERPs and conversions. So there is huge potential very often at times. Go ahead, please.
Brilliant. And yeah, sorry, my next question was, if we're going to work on brand, and I have a client, we worked on their brand and 20% uplift in brand searches year on year. Another client doubled the brand searches. And in both cases, we've seen huge wins in organic. Do you think the two are related?
Not necessarily, because to begin with, really every website is different, and it's even if they are in the same vertical, even if they compete directly for the same queries, it is not just merely about those two websites. To begin with, there can be another competitor we don't know about, and Google has this thing and this honeymoon period where new websites enter the realm, and Google doesn't really have enough factors, doesn't even really have enough signals and data in order to rank this website properly. So they give them a little bit of a boost in the beginning in order to see, does this website live up to expectation? Can it take a chunk of the cake in this particular vertical? That is absolutely something that is happening. But there is also things like updates, like algorithmic updates and policy updates, very frequently not really communicated openly for a long period of time. So these are all factors that can play a role, typically do play a role. So it's difficult to correlate those changes between two websites one-to-one.
No, so we're never really going to be able to correlate specifics. The global overall aspect of what we're doing is satisfy the user. If we can satisfy our clients, our audience, then Google is more likely to recommend us, because that's its ultimate aim, is customer satisfaction.
Yes, clearly and obviously. The whole concept, the success that Google is founded on is really users going to Google as the dominant search engine and looking for whatever they need in their life. Keeping the user satisfied, keeping them in place is a primary objective. For a lot of users out there that are not quite as tech savvy as people that may be listening to the podcast, Google is not merely a search engine, it is the search engine. I remember vividly talking to my father a while ago and mentioning other search engines in a different context, and he was baffled. How do you mean different? He didn't really contemplate the fact, the concept that there might be alternatives. So for a lot of users, it is really the case. And Google's success going forward is, of course, tied into users remaining happy. So measuring user success and factoring user satisfaction is absolutely something that is totally understandable for them to be doing. Therefore, I like to think that, us and our clients, we like to really live up to that dogma to say we want to make sure the website is popular by users, and hence, therefore, it is very popular within Google organic search as well.
And the association in Google's brain between satisfaction and a website, would that be translatable to Google's association of user satisfaction with a brand if it recognizes and understands the brand?
It does understand the brand, most certainly, and it is, of course, a strong indicator to Google with regard to brand when there are branded queries. So this is another thing we can work towards. If users are already familiar with our brand, users already know what Kalicube is about, they wouldn't only type in podcast brand, they would type in Kalicube podcast brand, and that would be a very, very different query in terms of quality for us, and of course with a very high likely chance of Kalicube actually ranking number one for that kind of query. So branded queries is a very strong indicator and something to work towards, most definitely.
And also very bottom of funnel, which is always delightful. I think people miss that. As soon as somebody's searching your brand name, they're bottom or post funnel, they're a client or a prospect or a potential partner. Next question is with Bing chat and answer engines, and Google now developing their new engine that they're probably not going to call bad anymore after the disaster in February. Where do you think brand is going to be in that scenario?
I do believe it will be front and central. What we're talking about here is utilizing the tools that are at our disposal right now, whether being used by search engines at a completely different level, or whether being used by our industry, to, I suppose, to utilize vast amounts of database input in order to speed up things, to provide answers. But it will not change the fact that brand plays a role. It will not change the fact that it won't change users over time, to the effect that they're stopped looking for things in the way they've been looking right now. I always have to think when I think about the current trends or the thing that is currently the biggest trend, with no regard to whatever it is at the given point in time, I always think, yes, they frequently come and go, but the fundamentals rarely change. I remember vividly a time where voice search was the killer, right?
Yeah.
So voice search is going to replace everything. Everybody seems to be optimizing for voice search. So how do you optimize exactly for voice search? It's pretty much still the same kind of content. It's not that everybody's switching to voice search, and even if they did, search engines, Google and other search engines still do need to have those signals in order to understand what your content really is about. So I do believe that voice search phenomena that passed, now we have AI, which is great. AI has a lot of applications, especially where efficiency and optimization is possible. So we can create content that is, I don't want to say boilerplate, but content that is rather not very too complicated, not very creative. That we can most certainly do. And it will be most likely utilized indeed also within search engines over time, but it will not lead to a situation where being the number one brand has no value. I believe being a known brand among the top brands will remain a killer factor for foreseeable time. Not the only one, but most certainly a very important one.
Right, and being the go-to brand online, or for the online community that you hopefully have as a representative audience, is hugely important across all of your digital marketing. And I think maybe that's something that people miss out on, is if you're working on your brand, it's not just for search, it's also on social media, it's on the communities and the platforms that your audience hang out on. So brand, for me at least, is the fundamental pillar of building any business, offline or online, but online increasingly incredibly important. So for the very last question, that wasn't a question, that was a statement. The last question for you, Kaspar, is how would you integrate brand SERP optimization into your SEO strategy, which is a question very close to my heart. Off you go.
Thank you, Jason. And I hope you will allow me a little bit of time to elaborate on the idea I would like to bring forward for our listeners to contemplate. So an overall SEO strategy is really much more complex. It's not just about one factor, be that brand or technical. Preferably, the overall strategy is much more rounded, with probably all, if not all, the many factors included. But when we look at brand, what I would like to encourage our listeners to is to look into the Google Search Console and specifically look into the volume of impressions they already are enjoying, as in compared against the volume of CTR, especially the low CTR, the queries or the landing pages that have a lot of visibility and very low CTR. These tend to be the low-hanging fruit where improvement can directly correlate imminently almost with much more relevant traffic, much more converting traffic in a short period of time. Utilize this as a pilot project to expand on it. And while you're doing that, keep in mind, and this is something that Jason was talking about a moment ago, it is not just an online world. Also to hear from online guys, but it is true, we live in an offline world as well. So there are factors that can also lead to brand recognition in the offline world, being that conferences, as we happen to be tapping in quite a lot. I'll be going to a conference myself tomorrow. Be that other areas where your target audience happens to be. That very well can be social media or something else. Be there. Make sure your brand is present there. That way you will be growing brand recognition over time. As you do so, your organic search visibility will grow because your target audience will be most likely to click on your results when they recognize the brand.
That was a brilliant last statement. And I love
Thank you,
the
sir.
offline world. We often forget it. Conferences, talking to people face to face in real life, hugely important. I love the term bring the offline online as much as you can, because your brand is offline. It exists offline. Google can't see it if it's not online. Do bring the offline online. Thank you so much, Kaspar. That was absolutely brilliant. Thank you everyone for watching. I enjoyed that immensely and I've taken a lot of super duper tips out of it. And next week, I'm going to get the same from Amir Glatt, AI and what it means for the future of digital marketing agencies. That's going to be super interesting. He is the CTO and co-founder of Duda. Could you possibly pass the baton, Kaspar?
Right then there, herewith, I'm passing on the button to Amir Glatt. And yeah, I look forward to hearing his show. And I want to use the opportunity to say, Jason, always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for having me on the show.
It's always a pleasure talking to you as well, Kaspar, since we very first met 4 or 5 years ago. A quick goodbye to end the show. Thank you, Kaspar.
Thank you.
Bye. Kalicube. It's all about your brand, SERP.